Oshin was scorned by her in-laws for eating one extra bowl of rice. At that point, Oshin could no longer bother with their opinions. She did the same hard labor as her husband every day, and she also had to nurse their son. If she didn't eat enough, her body would break down. Ryuzo told her they were living as dependents and should be more restrained. But Oshin replied that showing any more restraint would mean she wouldn't get to eat at all. She declared that from then on, no matter what anyone said, she would take the second bowl right after her brother and sister-in-law. Oshin wished Ryuzo could find a way for them to leave this house. However, 2 consecutive failures had destroyed Ryuzo's confidence in business. He decided to spend his entire life in Saga. To own land, Ryuzo even joined his father's land reclamation team. Whether it took 5 years or 10, he would endure any hardship to give Oshin and their son Kazuki a stable life. Oshin had no choice but to resolve to keep enduring. She planned to live there with Ryuzo forever. Then, her young niece asked Oshin what lazy and greedy meant. The child said her grandmother and mother had taught her to say that. They had also told her that her aunt was exactly that kind of person. The little girl's words cut Oshin deeply. When would such days ever end? Oshin felt as if she had fallen into a bottomless pit of despair. Once again, the thought of leaving this family took hold of her. She knew she wasn't afraid of hard work, but suffering here was utterly meaningless. No matter how hard she tried, she remained the daughter-in-law her mother-in-law despised. Oshin and Ryuzo disagreed about their future. For a while, neither could convince the other. While the young couple was struggling, a very different scene unfolded next door. Oshin's mother-in-law was enjoying a feast with her own daughter and eldest daughter-in-law. They were all talking and laughing happily. Oshin happened to see this. The atmosphere instantly turned awkward. The mother-in-law said the rice cakes were a gift from the eldest daughter-in-law's family. She added, with a hint of sarcasm, that Oshin must have smelled them. She then contrasted this with Oshin's own family, who paid no attention to their daughter's hardships. Oshin didn't want the cake, but she understood the message. That night, she made up her mind to leave this house eventually. But at that moment, she had nowhere to go. The idea of taking her son to an unfamiliar place to start over filled her with doubt. After much thought, Oshin finally wrote to her mother and her sister Kao, but she didn't mention any of her own troubles. She buried all her pain deep in her heart, where not even Ryuzo could see it. Oshin truly became silent. Then one day, Oshin received a letter from her former mentor, Master Taka. Master Taka was like a lamp lighting up Oshin's heart. The letter said the beauty salon would reopen in March. This letter reignited a flame of hope inside Oshin. She secretly vowed to endure until March, then returned to Tokyo to find Master Taka. In the past, she had done everything to please her mother-in-law, but it was never enough. Oshin no longer cared, for she was determined to leave. Ryuzo could not understand Oshin's feelings. He believed staying in Saga was their only real path. To make Oshin see this clearly, Ryuzo took a drastic step. He suddenly suggested they sleep in separate rooms. His mother seemed to seize this as new proof against Oshin. She soon came and took Ryuzo's bedding away. This was another heavy blow to their marriage. Oshin hadn't expected this day to come so soon. If Ryuzo also turned away from her, she would have no reason to stay in the Tamura house. Around the same time, Riko, who shared a similar fate, had an accident. Fortunately, she was saved in time and was not in danger. Oshin felt she completely understood why Riko had made that choice. They were both just trying to survive their misery. Oshin and Riko planned their escape to Tokyo together. They set the date for the spring equinox. But just then, Oshin discovered she was pregnant again. Yet Oshin did not waver in her plan to flee to Tokyo. For the sake of this new life, she felt she absolutely could not stay. On the day of the spring equinox, Oshin hid her belongings under her clothes. She used the excuse of going to work in the fields, planning never to return. Oshin's heart was pounding, but thinking of the baby inside her, she felt a deep sorrow. On the road to the train station, her husband suddenly caught up. Ryuzo knew he could not control Oshin's will, but he was determined not to let her take their son. A fierce quarrel erupted between them. A tragic accident happened at that moment. In the struggle over their child, Oshin fell and hit her head on a rock, losing consciousness instantly. Ryuzo was terrified. He had never imagined things would go this far. A husband often fails to see the hardships his wife endures in his family home. Conflicts between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law often happen behind the men's backs. No matter the danger, a mother's first thought upon waking is for her child. Seeing her son was safe, Oshin seemed to forget her own pain for a moment. Oshin's escape had failed. Now injured, she was forced to return with Ryuzo to the Tamura house. At that moment, Oshin felt like a lonely ghost with no one to rely on. Only Riko had known her plan. How did Ryuzo find out? The truth was, Riko's own kindness had led her to betray Oshin. Only Riko knew Oshin was pregnant with another child. She knew the impossible struggle a woman would face trying to survive alone with 2 babies. So Riko gave up her own chance to escape and told Ryuzo everything. She insisted he must bring Oshin back. Oshin had not expected Riko's betrayal, but she no longer had the strength to blame her. What was done could not be undone. Besides, Riko had given up her own chance for Oshin's sake. Riko herself would now face untold suffering. Thinking of this, Oshin's pity for Riko replaced her anger. Thinking of the future, Oshin felt the tragic weight of her own fate. Her injury was severe. Weak from blood loss, Oshin then developed a high fever. For 3 full days, she drifted in and out of consciousness. During this time, Ryuzo never left her side, caring for her day and night. His mother knew Ryuzo couldn't cook, yet she forbade his elder brother's wife from helping. But for Oshin's sake, Ryuzo felt no shame in trying. Ryuzo said many good things about Oshin to his mother. He also told Oshin that her mother-in-law was secretly worried about her. Yet his efforts to mediate were weak and ineffective. In Oshin's eyes, he was a powerless husband. In his mother's eyes, he was just a fool who spoiled his wife. 10 days later, Oshin could get up and walk to the toilet. But her right arm was still useless, and she couldn't hold their child. On that same day, Ryuzo's sister Naoko came for a visit. It turned out Naoko was also 3 months pregnant. Their mother promised to pay for all of Naoko's childbirth expenses. Oshin thought to herself, wasn't a new life also growing inside her? Yet the 2 unborn children would be treated worlds apart. This made Oshin grieve for her own baby's future. That day, Ryuzo asked Oshin to help in the kitchen. He hoped it might also help change his mother's opinion of her. But Oshin's right hand was still numb, and she only made a mess. On a day meant for celebration, she broke 10 bowls, infuriating her mother-in-law. Ryuzo defended Oshin fiercely. If she couldn't do heavy work, she could do lighter tasks. But Oshin tried for a long time and still couldn't hold a needle. In frustration, she said she would go back to working in the fields the next day. Oshin's arm wasn't injured. Why couldn't she move it? Her mother-in-law thought it was just an excuse to avoid work. Even Ryuzo began to suspect the same. The truth was, Oshin's injury was a severe tear from her neck to her shoulder. It would take a year or more to heal fully. Her right arm was numb, but Ryuzo didn't understand. He thought some movement would help her recover faster. Oshin could only endure. She had no other choice. A new life should bring joy and hope. But Oshin saw only a dark future ahead. She was filled with sadness. The hostile atmosphere made her hide her pregnancy from everyone. Oshin bore this injustice in silence, while Ryuzo remained completely unaware. Seeing little hope for Oshin's recovery, her mother-in-law pressured Ryuzo for a divorce. This made the relationship between the 2 women even more tense. Because of this pressure, Ryuzo also grew distant from Oshin. In just 5 months, their second child was due, but Oshin said nothing. She answered everything with silence. Her father-in-law began considering sending Oshin back to her parents. Just as Ryuzo was about to tell Oshin this decision, he discovered she was pregnant. Now, Oshin herself did not want to leave, for she truly had nowhere else to go. Her childhood home was now run by her brother, and she couldn't burden Master Taka in Tokyo. Her only remaining support was Ryuzo. After all, he was the child's father. The unborn child became a bond that tied the couple together again. Hearing her husband's promise, a faint smile finally appeared on Oshin's face. From then on, Ryuzo began to act more like a responsible husband. He tried to make sure Oshin did less work. When his mother became aggressive, Ryuzo did not back down. For the first time in his life, Ryuzo stood up to his mother. Seeing his son's firm stance, the father finally spoke. He explained that he wanted to send Oshin home earlier because he saw her suffering in silence. Now that Oshin wished to stay, he had no more objections. Just as Oshin thought the divorce talk was over, trouble arose with Riko. Mrs. Tamura and her daughter found money hidden in Riko's clothes. It was the $30 Oshin had given Riko for the trip to Tokyo. Under Mrs. Tamura's harsh questioning, Riko confessed about the escape plan with Oshin. Oshin hadn't expected this old matter to give her mother-in-law fresh ammunition. Mrs. Tamura declared she would no longer tolerate Oshin staying in the house. Ryuzo stepped forward and was forced to reveal Oshin's pregnancy. He stated firmly that Oshin could not be driven out now. Faced with his wife's rage, the father-in-law declared the matter closed. His words filled Oshin's heart with gratitude. This outcome was unexpected for Oshin. She had thought that if they insisted on driving her away, she would be helpless, but this time, Ryuzo had stood up to protect her. His love brought a sliver of warmth to Oshin's desolate heart, no matter how difficult the future. With Ryuzo's care, Oshin felt she could face it. A sense of happiness returned to Oshin for a moment. However, her mother-in-law soon created a new problem that shattered that peace. A local superstition said if two children were born in one house at the same time, one would die. Ryuzo's sister Naoko was also pregnant. With a due date close to Oshin's, Mrs. Tamura was determined that her daughter would give birth at home, so she found another place for Oshin to stay. But Oshin refused. She insisted on giving birth in her own home. Her defiance angered her mother-in-law greatly. Mrs. Tamura immediately went to complain to Ryuzo, but Ryuzo did not blame Oshin. Instead, he prepared to face the coming challenge with her. Oshin's resolve did not please her mother-in-law. The older woman superstitiously feared Oshin giving birth under her roof, but Oshin endured, throwing herself into work to prove she was a worthy Tamura daughter-in-law. One day, after the family sold their grain, Ryuzo gathered his courage to ask for their share of the money. His mother refused, reminding him of her earlier promise not to provide for Oshin. To their surprise, his father directly gave the money to Ryuzo. Soon, the rice transplanting season arrived, the busiest time for the family. Her mother-in-law chose this exact time to bring Naoko home. While everyone was working in the fields, Mrs. Tamura had a special treat prepared. She asked her eldest daughter-in-law to make sweet red bean soup with rice cakes. She told her grandchildren it was a secret and they must not tell anyone, but the little girl immediately told others about the soup. This left a bitter taste in Ryuzo's mouth. That day, after Naoko finished bathing, Ryuzo told Oshin to go next. This shocked his mother. Traditionally, the women bathe only after all the men were done. Ryuzo argued that since his sister had already bathed, why couldn't Oshin? The argument between mother and son put Oshin in a difficult position. She made an excuse about needing to wash diapers first, which diffused the conflict. Ryuzo could not swallow this injustice. He wanted Oshin to have some of the red bean soup too. His mother evasively claimed they hadn't had any soup at all. Hearing this lie, Ryuzo's anger boiled over. Oshin heard the shouting and rushed to calm her husband, but Ryuzo could no longer tolerate the unfairness and lost his temper. His outburst was useless and only made Oshin's position more miserable. Poor Oshin could only endure the torment. She had nowhere else to go but the Tamura house. She had to give birth to her child here. Oshin worked in the fields daily and was deprived of any nutritious food for her baby. Mrs. Tamura's treatment finally became too much for her husband to bear. The father-in-law tried to give his own fish to Oshin, but his wife shamelessly took it, saying she would save it for Naoko. Each time she returned from the fields, Oshin was completely exhausted, but she clenched her teeth, determined to endure until the birth. Out of kindness, the father-in-law assigned Oshin light chores at home, but the moment he left, his wife found ways to torment Oshin. She wasn't allowed in the kitchen or even to sweep the floor. In this house, Oshin felt like an unwanted extra. Even breathing seemed to draw scornful looks from her mother-in-law. The special noodles made for Naoko were not offered to Oshin. Only after everyone had eaten was Oshin called to the kitchen to cook plain noodles. Even then, her mother-in-law was unrelenting. Oshin could no longer bear her mother-in-law's persecution. The next day, she asked to return to working in the fields. Her father-in-law, unaware of the mistreatment, agreed. From then on, no matter how tired she was, Oshin never rested at home. She felt the depth of her hopeless situation. As the rice harvest began, Oshin's due date approached. One day, her mother-in-law summoned her. She planned to clear out Oshin's storage room for Naoko to give birth in. Oshin was moved to a small shed far from the main house. Her mother-in-law superstitiously feared having both women give birth in the same compound. Oshin accepted this silently. Soon, Naoko went into labor. Pampered and inactive, Naoko had a difficult delivery. Her mother blamed everything on Oshin. She believed Oshin had brought this misfortune. The father-in-law could no longer tolerate his wife's nonsense. To help Naoko and comfort his wife, Ryuzo went out in a stormy night to fetch a doctor from town. At that very same moment, Oshin's own labor began. Crying out for Ryuzo through the pain, she collapsed in the muddy shed and lost consciousness. By dawn, Naoko had safely given birth to a daughter. But for Oshin, that night was a tragedy. Ryuzo returned to find Oshin unconscious and pale. In that moment, he was consumed by guilt. Oshin soon woke up. Her first words were to ask for her baby, but the child had been stillborn. Fearing Oshin couldn't bear the shock, Ryuzo lied that the baby was with his mother. Meanwhile, The main house was celebrating Naoko's safe delivery with a feast. Hearing the laughter, Ryuzo could no longer hide his fury. Naoko was saved, but Oshin's child was gone. Ryuzo felt he could no longer face his wife. Yet, Oshin had to learn the truth. Her father-in-law told her everything that had happened. Unable to bear the blow, Oshin became mentally distant. She had already chosen a name for her daughter. The cruel reality shattered all her hopes. From then on, Oshin grew even more silent, often staring vacantly into space. Ryuzo saw that the wound in Oshin's heart was deep. A new problem arose. Naoko had no milk after her difficult birth. Oshin had milk, but no child to nurse. Mrs. Tamura, desperate, had to swallow her pride and ask Ryuzo for help. Ryuzo refused such a cruel request outright. It was too unfair to Oshin, but the eldest sister-in-law, also a mother, understood. With Oshin so broken, nursing a child might actually comfort her. Hoping to soothe Oshin's pain, Ryuzo brought Naoko's baby to her. As predicted, Oshin took the child without a word. It was the power of a mother's instinct. The long conflict between the two women seemed to melt away in an instant. It was less Oshin's selflessness and more the life-saving milk that softened her mother-in-law's heart. Oshin finally gained acceptance, but the cost was devastating. In truth, Oshin was not insane. She was clearer-headed than ever. During her silence, she had reached a conclusion. For her son's sake, she could not collapse. To ensure Oshin produced milk, her mother-in-law attended to her needs with unprecedented care. Yet Oshin confessed, "My baby was alive when she was born. She just didn't cry." She had no strength to cry. For the first time, her mother-in-law spoke to her with genuine gentleness. This brought Ryuzo immense relief. They believed Oshin would be happy too. But what Oshin truly felt, no one knew. Soon, it was time for the baby's naming ceremony. Her mother-in-law suggested the name Myo. She said they owed the child's life to Oshin. She hoped to forever remember Oshin's kindness through this child. It was also a repayment for the gift of Oshin's milk. This was the first peaceful day Oshin had known since returning to Saga. To help Oshin recover, her mother-in-law no longer made her work in the fields. Aside from nursing Myo a few times a day, Oshin spent her time playing with Kazuki. On the surface, Oshin seemed to have forgotten her loss, but her true thoughts remained a mystery. A month later, when Naoko prepared to return home with Myo, Oshin finally spoke her mind. From the moment she lost her own child, Oshin had resolved to leave the Tamura house. She shared all her thoughts with Ryuzo. Oshin's determination to leave was unshakable. This was not a discussion, but a farewell. Yet, Ryuzo still could not understand Oshin's feelings. For him, home was his safest harbor. Mrs. Tamura absolutely refused to let Oshin take Kazuki away. Just as Oshin felt trapped, her eldest sister-in-law offered help. They agreed on a meeting place. She promised to find a chance to sneak Kazuki out once her mother-in-law's guard was down. And so, Oshin left Ryuzo behind. She left that backyard filled with bitterness behind. She left the household that had brought her so much suffering behind, and departed alone. She pinned all her hopes on a promise from her sister-in-law. Oshin waited anxiously by Genemon's grave for her sister-in-law to bring her son. Her sister-in-law had always endured humiliation silently. Unexpectedly, this same woman had now begun to dare to resist. Oshin worried about what the future might hold for her sister-in-law. At the same time, she felt fortunate to have escaped her own sea of misery. Oshin was solely focused on leaving. Where she would go mattered little to her. After traveling for 3 long, grueling days and nights, Oshin finally managed to bring her son to Tokyo. But she had no place to stay. Holding on to a small hope, Oshin sought shelter at Master Taka's beauty salon. But her injured right hand could no longer work on other people's hair. Oshin truly did not want to trouble her mentor further. However, for Taka, Oshin's arrival was also a comfort. If it hadn't been for Oshin's help in switching to Western hairstyles back then, the salon would not be what it was today. So, as long as she had food to eat, she would never let Oshin and her child go hungry. Her mentor's kindness warmed Oshin's heart. She felt both happy and sad. If she couldn't style hair anymore, how could she justify staying and eating for free at her mentor's place? Oshin quietly promised herself she would find proper work in Tokyo, no matter what it took. Just as Oshin felt lost about the future, Ken appeared at this moment. His smile ignited a small spark of light in Oshin's bewildered heart. With Ken's help, Oshin rented a stall at the night market to sell griddle cakes. Oshin believed that every ounce of effort would yield results. From purchasing ingredients to preparing for the day's business, Oshin handled everything personally. And so, Oshin raised her child while running her small business. Her life passed by day after day in this busy routine. During New Year's celebrations, Oshin wrote a letter to Ryuzo, how she wished Ryuzo could come to her soon and live with her and their son. However, this letter, which concerned the future fate of the couple, was torn to shreds by her mother-in-law. Under his mother's interference, Ryuzo received no news from Oshin and assumed she had long forgotten him. Meanwhile, Oshin continued to silently hope for the day their family of 3 would be reunited. She ran the griddle cake stall from late autumn until early spring. Although it was not easy, it allowed her to be self-reliant and support herself and her son. With no word from Oshin and their son, Ryuzo grew increasingly haggard. His father could no longer stand to see him like this and finally gave him some pointed advice. Why must you wait for Oshin to write to you? As her husband, you should take the initiative and write to Oshin. You know where she is, don't you? Ken often brought Oshin daily necessities. He also insisted on escorting her and her son home every late night. Gossip naturally swirled around a single woman's door. One evening, Ken's wife suddenly came to Oshin's home. Oshin felt remorse and shame. She had been scrambling for survival. She never meant to hurt another woman's feelings. Deeply troubled, she resolved never to trouble Ken again. At the same time, she became aware of Ken's affection for her. It seemed she could no longer stay in Tokyo. But where else could she go? Now completely out of options, Oshin could only choose to return to her hometown, which Oshin had left 4 years ago. In those 4 years, Oshin had gotten married. She had experienced a major earthquake and the pain of 2 childbirths. One could say she had both gained and lost. Oshin felt utterly exhausted, as if she had walked a difficult road spanning decades. And now, she had to drag her weary body and battered heart back to her hometown, because her mother was there, waiting for her. But upon arriving home, Oshin found that even eating required reading her sister-in-law's mood. To protect her daughter, her mother, usually quiet and enduring, suddenly became assertive. But her daughter-in-law, strong-willed and bold, ignored her mother-in-law. Infuriated, her mother insisted on setting up a separate household. Now that her daughter had fallen on hard times, her mother was the only one she could rely on to prepare for such a day. Fuji had endured poverty and hardship all this time. Her brother's heartlessness made Oshin feel desolate, but her mother's care brought her infinite comfort. Where there are children, there is conflict. One day, Kazuki snatched his cousin's snack and was severely beaten by his aunt. Oshin's heart ached for her child, but Oshin could say nothing. After all, Kazuki was in the wrong. But when her mother found out, she was furious. She felt this would affect Kazuki's well-being and went to confront her daughter-in-law. Unexpectedly, her daughter-in-law showed her mother-in-law no respect at all. Unable to tolerate the disrespect, Fuji grabbed a sickle and ran out. She opened a sack of rice in the storeroom, planning to exchange the rice for snacks for Kazuki. Fuji had endured humiliation and poverty her whole life. Now, to prevent her daughter and grandson from suffering, she began to grow strong. However, Fuji's newfound strength seemed feeble compared to her son's long-standing cold-heartedness. Not wanting to burden her mother, Oshin took a cleaning job at a landowner's house. And so, Oshin went out to work during the day with her son on her back, and depended on her mother at night. However, this peaceful life did not last long. One day, Oshin suddenly received news that the old master of the Kaga rice store was critically ill. To Oshin, Kaneko was as much a benefactor as Shota had been, so she immediately took Kazuki and rushed to Sakata. Oshin watched over the unconscious Kaneko, staying by her side all night. Kaneko, like a candle burned down to its last flicker, closed her eyes peacefully before dawn. Oshin felt that Kaneko's death was like the fall of a great tree. It seemed to mark the end of an era. Oshin had no time to grieve for Kaneko's death. She immediately threw herself into the busy work of handling the funeral arrangements. Oshin had worked for Kaneko from age 8 to 16. Kaneko treated Oshin better than her own granddaughter Kao, teaching her how to conduct herself and handle affairs. She nurtured Oshin into a well-educated woman. Oshin decided to stay through Kaneko's first 7th-day memorial before leaving the Kaga store. However, on the 7th day, Kao suddenly asked Oshin to stay in Sakata and start a business. It turned out Ayako had told Kao about Oshin's ordeal. To find a path for Oshin to live independently, Kao gave Oshin a property under the Kaga store's name to use as a shopfront. Oshin felt like she was dreaming, unable to believe it. Starting a business was extremely tempting for Oshin, but she also knew it wouldn't be easy. But at the same time, she realized it wouldn't be simple. Oshin now stood at a crossroads in her life. For Oshin, this was not her first time in business. Although she couldn't guarantee success, whenever she began preparations, she always gained new insights. She discovered her business acumen had also been honed through experience. With help from the Kaga rice store, Oshin opened a small eatery on the street. However, on its first day, the eatery had not a single customer. To recoup costs, Oshin made the cooked rice into rice balls and tried to sell them at the dock, but still found no buyers. The next day, Oshin simply closed the shop. She worked tirelessly for 3 days, writing hundreds of flyers. With Kazuki on her back, she posted them everywhere, trying to let people know about her new eatery. On the third evening, customers began to arrive one after another. Oshin and Ko worked busily through the night with joy. That night, the eatery served 43 customers and earned a total of 86 cents. Oshin's food was both cheap and generous in portion. The eatery's reputation grew steadily. Oshin's business became more and more prosperous. However, the eatery's success began to affect the business of nearby shops. Soon, 2 local thugs came to cause trouble. Oshin had done nothing wrong. High quality, affordable food was what customers needed, so she had no intention of backing down. The thugs in this area had never been challenged before. Oshin knew that when dealing with such people, the more timid you appeared, the more aggressive they became. In life, what one learns always proves useful someday. The 2 thugs were subdued by Oshin's imposing manner. This was something even Oshin hadn't expected. It turned out the gang affiliation Oshin mentioned was one the 2 men dared not offend. From then on, no one dared to cause trouble at the eatery again. Oshin's business flourished more and more. The eatery's reputation grew even greater. Customers came out of curiosity to see the remarkable woman who ran the place, but most came because the food was both affordable and delicious. One day, a very special customer suddenly arrived. It was Kota, the man for whom both Oshin and Ko had once lost their hearts. Oshin never imagined she would see Kota again in Sakata. But for Oshin today, Kota was someone she did not wish to see, because she didn't want Kota to see her living alone, separated from her husband, raising a child. If she were to tell Kota about the hardships of the past few years, she would weep until she broke down. Oshin had written to Ryuzo several times, but to this day had received no reply. The reason for this was, of course, her mother-in-law. Mrs. Tamura was like an insurmountable chasm, forcibly separating Oshin and Ryuzo. Oshin was in immense pain now. She felt she might have made an irreparable mistake in her choice of life's path, so much so that she now had no family by her side. Kota had to wait until the eatery closed to find a chance to speak with Oshin. He had assumed Oshin was living a stable, happy life with Ryuzo. He never dreamed Oshin had fallen to such a state. Ko told Kota about all the hardships Oshin had endured these past years. Ryuzo showed no concern for Oshin and their son. It seemed he had abandoned them. This was the most difficult time in Oshin's life. After all, finding a way to survive alone with a child was not easy. Ko sincerely hoped Kota and Oshin could reconcile. This could also make up for her own past mistake of taking the man Oshin loved. After a period of deep reflection, Kota finally confessed his feelings to Oshin. Oshin was grateful to Kota from the bottom of her heart, but she was no longer the Oshin of the past. Ko encouraged Kota never to give up. If he listened to Oshin's reasoning, they would never marry. To dispel Oshin's doubts, Kota decided to find out what Ryuzo truly thought. If Ryuzo had truly abandoned them, this time he would not stand idly by. As it happened, the letter Kota sent to Ryuzo was also opened by Ryuzo's mother. Ko believed that since Ryuzo did not reply, he was assumed to be severing ties with Oshin. For Kota, even if Oshin refused to marry him, he would take care of Oshin and Kazuki for the rest of his life. Just then, Ayako suddenly also arrived in Sakata. To Oshin, Ayako was also a benefactor in her life. The letters Oshin wrote home were all read to her mother by Ayako, and every reply from her mother was also written by Ayako's hand. This time, Ayako brought news about Ryuzo writing to Oshin's hometown, to make her son forget Oshin and their son and start a new life. Mrs. Tamura had intercepted all letters Oshin sent to Ryuzo. Her sister-in-law could no longer stand by and privately told Ryuzo about this. She also painstakingly pieced together every letter his mother had torn up and gave them all to Ryuzo. Ryuzo could never have imagined his mother would do such a thing. Learning that Oshin had not forgotten him, he clearly stated his position to his mother. Once he had his own land, he would immediately bring Oshin and Kazuki back. He then sent a registered letter to Oshin. Inside the envelope was also a money order for $20. This was Ryuzo's handwriting, so familiar to Oshin. Over a year had passed, and now she finally received a letter from Ryuzo. Oshin held the letter, feeling its weight. A wave of warmth instantly surged in her heart. Oshin believed that as long as husband and wife trusted each other, Their family would reunite one day. One day, two drunkards caused trouble at the shop, and Kota happened to be there. Watching Oshin deal with the drunkards, Kota felt a complex mix of emotions. He deeply understood Oshin's difficulties. Life had clearly forced Oshin to become a different person. He told Oshin to stop this kind of business, because seeing the drunkards put their arms around Oshin was more than he could bear. If Ryuzo saw it, he would likely feel the same. If this business caused discord between Oshin and Ryuzo in the future, then she shouldn't continue it. For Oshin, this eatery was something she had desperately fought to build. It was the only path she had to survive. She had struggled so hard to finally find a way, yet Kota's words strongly affected her. In the end, Oshin decided to follow Kota's arrangement and close the eatery, to find a life path truly her own. Oshin, with complex emotions, once again left Sakata. She took Kazuki alone to the unfamiliar ISE. Here, Kota had already found them a place to stay. Oshin and her son temporarily lived at Grandma Gue's house. Grandma Gue was a cousin of Kota's mother and owned several fishing boats. The job Kota found for Oshin was selling fish. For Oshin, this was a completely new beginning. Looking back, from the day she started styling hair until now, she had tried several businesses. However, selling fish door to door was a first for Oshin. On the first day, Oshin didn't sell a single fish. In this area, every household already had a regular fish delivery person. To break through, Oshin thought hard. Finally, she simply gave the fish away to nearby villagers. Free fish were naturally welcomed, and the customers remembered Oshin immediately. The next day, Oshin continued to strengthen the customers' impression of her. She sold each fish for 5 cents cheaper than others. Oshin's method was to win customers' hearts first, accepting losses initially to profit later. However, Oshin's practice affected other fish vendors' business. Usually, everyone sold at a 30% markup over cost, while Oshin only added 10%. This disrupted the market price all at once. Grandma Gue told Oshin to proceed with her own ideas. If she paid too much attention to others' opinions, she wouldn't do good business. From then on, whenever fishing boats docked, Oshin would push her cart, with Kazuki, from the town to the villages, peddling her wares. The fish Oshin sold were always 1 or 2 cents cheaper than other vendors, so she could only rely on small profits but high sales volume to make a profit. Through her actions, Oshin gradually won the customer's trust. Learning that a customer's household had a sick elder, Oshin would readily offer her own small gift. To honor her deceased grandmother's memory, Oshin was willing to do such good deeds for a lifetime. Oshin always did things others were unwilling to do. Gradually, even her competitors began to regard her with respect. They no longer complained that Oshin was stealing their business. Each time there were fish the fishing boats couldn't wholesale, Oshin would buy them all. She processed these fish into salted fish and stored them. When rainy days came and the boats couldn't go out to sea, Oshin could sell these salted fish. Unconsciously, Oshin had been here for over a year. Near the end of the year, Kota came to visit her and her son. Oshin's dream was to open a fish shop in this town. She dreamed of the day she could bring her husband Ryuzo here for a reunion. It seemed Oshin's wish was about to come true. Now that Kota saw Oshin and her son living a stable life, he could finally rest assured. That night, Oshin wrote a letter to her husband Ryuzo. She felt that only by living together as a family of 3 could she repay Kota's kindness. In truth, Oshin had no certainty at all about whether Ryuzo would actually come, until that summer, when the island was hit by an unprecedented storm. Returning from selling fish that day, Oshin faintly thought she saw Ryuzo's figure. She desperately chased after him. The person hurriedly leaving was indeed Ryuzo. One night's typhoon had completely extinguished Ryuzo's dream of reclaiming land from the sea, a dream he had held for over 4 years. Disheartened and disappointed, Ryuzo decided to seek a livelihood elsewhere. Ryuzo had come to ISE this time intending to quietly bid farewell to Oshin and their son. He never expected Oshin to discover him. Oshin once again faced a turning point in her life. She begged Ryuzo to stay, because she did not want Kazuki to grow up without a father. However, Ryuzo was a very stubborn man. The next day, the couple went to town together. One struggled to scrape by a living with a child. The other pursued dreams and distant horizons regardless of all else. Since neither could convince the other, they had no choice but to part ways once again. Oshin went as usual to deliver fish to her regular customers. Watching the receding figures of mother and son, a sudden, indescribable feeling arose in Ryuzo's heart. He abruptly changed his mind and followed Oshin's path. He wanted to see what kind of life they were really living. He never imagined Oshin was doing such heavy work. All along, Ryuzo had acted willfully, never considering the circumstances of Oshin and their son. Now he finally deeply understood Oshin's hardships. Ryuzo could no longer bear to let Oshin suffer alone. He decided to stay and sell fish together with Oshin. Oshin could hardly believe her ears. She never thought their family of 3 would be together so quickly. At that moment, Oshin felt that over 4 years of waiting had been worth it. Ryuzo living with Oshin and Kazuki again brought new changes to Oshin's life. The fish shop she had long dreamed of finally opened. That day, returning from selling fish outside, Oshin walked into their new home for 3. The future prospects of the fish shop were uncertain in Oshin's mind, but Ryuzo's rekindled enthusiasm thrilled Oshin deeply. She felt that even if the fish shop business faced setbacks, she would have no regrets. From that day on, Oshin and Ryuzo started running the fish shop together. Every day before dawn, Ryuzo went to the fishing port to buy fresh fish for the shop. Oshin wasn't sure how long Ryuzo could endure such grueling work. Fortunately, with Grandma Gue's help, Ryuzo didn't encounter any major difficulties. But when it came to selling fish, he knew nothing. As a result, on the shop's opening day, they didn't sell all their fish. To boost sales, Oshin and Ryuzo switched from street hawking to door-to-door solicitation. To lighten Oshin's load, Ryuzo studied fish knowledge at night. Though the results weren't as good as hoped, Oshin felt deeply comforted. To her, Ryuzo's dedication was invaluable. She believed a united couple was more important than making money. Through their joint efforts, the fish shop's business gradually stabilized. One day, Oshin and Ryuzo unexpectedly received a package from Saga. Ryuzo's mother had sent all his belongings. His departure had finally made her realize a truth. If you truly love your child, you should let them choose their own path. Mrs. Tamura also expressed her concern for Oshin and sincerely hoped the family of 3 would live in harmony. Oshin resolved to run the fish shop successfully with Ryuzo, so that one day they could bring her in-laws to live with them. Before they knew it, a year and a half had passed since Oshin and Ryuzo opened their shop. Kazuki was now 6 years old and would start elementary school in the spring. At this point, Oshin had one wish: to bring her mother from the countryside to live with them. Ryuzo promptly brought his mother-in-law from the countryside. Oshin was deeply grateful for Ryuzo's thoughtfulness. Neither mother nor daughter had ever imagined they would see each other again in this lifetime. Kazuki's entrance ceremony made up for Oshin's own unfulfilled dream of attending school. Just as Fuji was preparing to leave after the ceremony, Oshin suddenly received a letter from her brother. The couple learned their mother was struggling at home. Too old to work, she had become a burden to her son and daughter-in-law. Though aware she was unwelcome, Fuji insisted on returning home. Fuji didn't want to add to Oshin's burdens. Ryuzo racked his brain for an excuse to keep his mother-in-law. Just then, Oshin discovered she was pregnant again. Ryuzo took this chance to sincerely ask his mother-in-law to stay and help Oshin. Moved by Ryuzo's sincerity, Fuji finally agreed to wait until after Oshin gave birth before leaving. In mid-October of that year, Oshin safely delivered a baby boy. Yet on the very night of Oshin's delivery, her mother suddenly fell gravely ill. Unaware of this, Oshin remained immersed in her newfound happiness. Ryuzo rushed his mother-in-law for medical examination. The results confirmed she had leukemia, but Ryuzo kept this knowledge to himself, telling no one else. From that day on, Fuji could no longer get out of bed. During this time, Grandma Gue took charge of all household duties. She not only cared for Oshin's 2 children but also tenderly looked after the bedridden Fuji. Knowing her time was short, Fuji's final wish was to return to her hometown. Oshin, unaware of the truth, thought her mother simply missed home, but Ryuzo told her it might be too late. Her mother's illness was terminal. It would be better to let her stay here and be well cared for. That way, they could fulfill their filial duty one last time. Ryuzo's words struck Oshin like a bolt from the blue, leaving her utterly at a loss. If this was true, then she must bring her mother home, for at this very moment, returning to her hometown to rest in peace was her mother's greatest wish. Oshin carried her frail mother on her back. Trudging through the long journey, she held her mother tightly against her back. Walking with great effort, she barely felt the weight, for her mother was now little more than skin and bones. Oshin's heart was filled with endless sorrow. As her mother's final moments approached, Oshin wanted to call back her younger siblings, but her brother felt it unnecessary. Even if everyone returned, it wouldn't change anything, only adding more mouths to feed. Oshin had long grown accustomed to her brother's coldness. In her mother's last moments, she refused to stir any conflict. She devoted herself entirely to staying by her mother's side. Now that help was available, Her mother could no longer eat anything. Memories of the family gathered around a meal of radish rice surfaced in her mind. Back then, though they never had enough to eat, everyone was healthy and whole. Wasn't being together as a family a kind of happiness? Now Oshin had a stable life. Shoji had married and had children. Fuji had no regrets. Gazing at the snowfall over her hometown, she gradually lost consciousness. Without her mother, this home held no attraction for Oshin anymore. Oshin bade farewell to her homeland. On the journey home, her heart was filled with sorrow and melancholy. There was no bond left between the siblings. Now that mother is gone, Oshin has no homeland left. Her only concern now is the family she built with Ryuzo and the 2 children they raised. That spring, Kazuki finished his first year of elementary school. It was the day of his graduation ceremony. On that very day, Kota suddenly appeared. From Kota, Oshin learned that Keio's husband had passed away due to poor business management. His family's Kaga store had also closed down, burdened by a large debt. To evade creditors, Keio's family had fled to Tokyo. Kota left an address and 100 yen, entrusting Oshin to find Keio in Tokyo. Ryuzo insisted Oshin give Keio the entire 100 yen. It was Kota's heartfelt gesture. As for travel expenses to Tokyo, he would figure it out himself. Before departure, Ryuzo warned Oshin to brace herself. The address Kota provided had been a brothel before the earthquake. Ryuzo's words weighed heavily on Oshin's heart. She silently prayed her fears might prove unfounded. Arriving in Tokyo after years apart, Oshin first sought out an old acquaintance. Taka showed no surprise at Oshin's arrival. Among all her apprentices, only Oshin had kept her in constant thought. Since opening her fish shop, Oshin had regularly sent her master pickled fish made with sake leaves. Upon learning Oshin's purpose, Taka grew deeply concerned. The place where Keio was staying was somewhere Oshin couldn't go alone. Fortunately, Oshin had another friend in Tokyo. With Ken's help, Oshin managed to see Keio. She never imagined Keio had fallen into such a state. Now Keio was struggling desperately for her child. She couldn't even afford to send her parents' ashes back to Sakata. That night, Oshin didn't sleep a wink. Perhaps seeing Oshin was the final straw. Keio could hold on no longer. The next day, she passed away, leaving her child behind. Keio left Oshin a farewell letter and the 100 yen note Kota had given her. Days later, Oshin returned with Keio's orphan child. Ryuzo harbored no resentment toward Oshin's unilateral decision. Though their life remained difficult, taking in one more child wouldn't make it unbearable. Oshin used the 100 yen Keio left to purchase a grave plot. That day, the children playing games before the door unsettled Oshin, for Japan was now shrouded in the dark clouds of war. This war transformed not only Ryuzo's beliefs but also the mindset of the people. As a child, Oshin had heard of war's cruelty from Shota, the deserter. Thus, she harbored deep loathing for warfare. For Oshin, running the fish shop and raising her 3 children to adulthood defined her life. Yet she could never have imagined this war would last 15 long years, even in history's darkest hour. However, glimmers of humanity still shone. Kota had previously fought tirelessly for impoverished tenant farmers. Now he was determined to prevent Japan from descending into fascism. In this regard, Oshin and Kota shared a profound ideological resonance. She hoped for Kota's professional success while simultaneously praying for his personal safety. Yet a woman's strength seemed utterly insignificant against the tide of history. Just as Kota visited Keio's grave, plainclothes police suddenly appeared, shattering the ideals he had pursued. Oshin could only watch helplessly as Kota was taken away, unable to do anything. From that day onward, Kota vanished without a trace. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. Ken suddenly arrived at Oshin's place with a child. The girl was named Kanako, just turning 9. Seeing her, Oshin felt as if she were looking at her own childhood self. Upon learning more, Oshin discovered Kanako was the daughter of a tenant farmer. This fact Oshin had long suspected. She only wondered why the child was with Ken. It turned out the tenant farmer's family remained destitute. To feed their bellies, many families had no choice but to sell their children. Someone had entrusted Ken to take Kanako to Osaka in search of work. Oshin hadn't realized that after all these years, tenant farmers' lives remained so bitter. The couple had stayed up late entertaining Ken and overslept the next morning. When Oshin hurried into the kitchen to make breakfast, the scene before her eyes filled her with inexplicable sadness. Seeing Kanako reminded Oshin of the hardships she herself had endured as a child. This stirred a deep sense of compassion within her. Suddenly, Oshin conceived an idea to keep Kanako and raise her as her own child. But with 3 boys already in the household, taking in another seemed overwhelming. Fortunately, Kanako's contract was only for 3 years. She could endure it until then. Thus, the Ryuzo couple purchased Kanako from Ken for 50 yen. From that day on, Oshin was a mother to 4. She treated Kanako as her own. For Kanako, who never dreamed of going to school, it was a miracle. Ryuzo was no different, preparing her school supplies just like the others. Their family had grown, and so had their responsibilities. Times were hard during the economic downturn. Running a fish shop and putting 4 kids through school was a constant struggle, but Oshin and Ryuzo faced it with optimism. Working twice as hard, life was tough, but their home was full. After all, they saw their children not as a burden, but as a blessing. Yet problems arose just days into the new term. Daiki became the target of his classmates' ridicule. They all called him a wild child. This deeply wounded the young Daiki. He refused to go to school anymore. Haruki even got into a fight with classmates over it. Oshin was filled with regret and anguish. Unable to bear the blow, Daiki chose to run away from home. By nightfall, the family still hadn't found any trace of him. As Oshin searched, she found herself at Keio's grave. Guilt overwhelmed her. If anything happened to Daiki, she'd betray Keio's sacrifice. Thankfully, Daiki soon reappeared. Without a word, Oshin struck him hard across the face. That slap, Oshin felt, was from Keio. She'd always treated Daiki as her own child, even more tenderly than her own offspring. Thus, Oshin was undoubtedly Daiki's mother. Naturally, she bore an inescapable responsibility for his upbringing. Daiki recognized his mistake and never again mentioned dropping out of school. Yet after this incident, Oshin never scolded Daiki again. Instead, she often reprimanded Haruki. Oshin desperately wanted to treat both children equally, but doing so proved incredibly difficult. Daiki always kept a certain distance from them, growing increasingly withdrawn, while Haruki began acting more and more unreasonable. Oshin wasn't oblivious to these subtle changes in her children, but at that time, she was pregnant with her 4th child and simply didn't have the energy to manage these trivial matters. After the new year, Oshin gave birth to a baby girl without incident. By then, she was already 36 years old. Kanako quietly took care of the infant. Her first task after school was to carry the baby while preparing dinner for the family. Oshin and Ryuzo worked even harder to keep the fish shop running. The family lived modestly yet warmly. Another year passed, and Kanako's 3-year contract ended. She was also nearing graduation from elementary school. Oshin felt torn. She wanted Kanako to stay, but lacked the means to support her. Kanako understood she was no longer needed here. She had long prepared to return home, but by this time, Kazuki had come to regard Kanako as his own sister. He refused to let her leave under any circumstances. Finally, at Haruki and Daiki's request, Oshin decided to let Kanako choose for herself. Given the warm family environment, Kanako naturally didn't want to leave if she could stay. Upon learning Kanako's wish, Oshin had no further doubts. Life ahead would be tough, but as long as the family remained united, wasn't that a kind of happiness? 6 years passed in the blink of an eye. One day, Oshin suddenly heard news about Kota. Though she found it hard to believe, she couldn't help but rush to Grandma Gue's house to check. Sure enough, the person walking on the beach was Kota. But Kota was no longer the man he once was. Limping on one leg, it was clear Kota had endured brutal treatment in prison. 6 years of inhuman torment had shattered his faith. Though now free, his spirit would remain imprisoned for life. At this moment, the person he dreaded seeing most was likely Oshin. Oshin didn't know whether to feel joy or sorrow for Kota. She only sensed a powerful force now gripping and controlling Japan. This mysterious power sent a chill down her spine. That day, Ryuzo's second eldest brother, Army Colonel Kamijiro, suddenly arrived at the fish shop. Unable to fathom Kamijiro's intentions, Oshin couldn't help but feel uneasy. She didn't want Kazuki to have too much contact with Kamijiro, but often, what you fear most is exactly what comes to pass. Kamijiro urged his younger brother to do business with the military. Oshin refused to have anything to do with the army. She didn't want to become an accomplice to the military, aiding the expansion of war. That night, Oshin lay awake for a long time. For so long, she had spent her days and nights in constant busyness. Only now did she realize she had long been caught in the vortex of war. Oshin clearly recalled that winter she spent with Shota. Shota had told her of war's cruelty, urging her never to fight. Those heartfelt words still echoed in Oshin's heart. ringing in her ears. Yet she saw events spiraling beyond her control. This filled Oshin with dread and regret, but the next day brought news that terrified her even more. Her son suddenly told her he wanted to enter the military academy. Kazuki had never left Oshin's side since he was born. She had always shielded him fiercely, though Oshin had always opposed the war. What could one woman do against the tide of history? For the first time in her life, the strong Oshin shed helpless tears. Suddenly, she felt Kazuki slipping further and further away from her. Soon after, spring began. Bidding for supplying goods to the military opened. With his brother Kamajiro's help, Ryuzo successfully secured the contract. Watching Ryuzo's triumphant, almost reckless joy, Oshin felt inexplicably troubled. She saw the starkly different paths life could take in wartime. Whether Ryuzo's choice was right or wrong, it was too soon to tell, but she couldn't help feeling a pang of regret. To survive, they now relied on the military's favor. A persistent shadow hung over Oshin's heart, compounded by Kazuki's situation. Her mood grew even heavier. Though Kanako couldn't fathom why Kazuki had suddenly become so fascinated with the military, she urged him to consider his mother's feelings. What mother would willingly send her child off to war? Especially when Kazuki had never left his mother's side since childhood. This was unbearably painful for her. Kanako's words suddenly made Kazuki understand his mother's feelings. It was also the first time in his life he had seen his mother cry. Kazuki never wanted to make his mother sad again. This turn of events left both Oshin and Ryuzo astonished. To spare his mother worry, Kazuki abandoned his military dreams and chose the liberal arts without hesitation. Oshin felt deeply comforted. For her, the greatest happiness was simply being with her family, safe and at peace. The following spring, Kazuki successfully enrolled in Kyoto Third High School. By this time, the war not only persisted but increasingly threatened the peaceful lives of the people. It was in such turbulent times that Kazuki entered high school. He was finally leaving his parents to live on his own. Before leaving home, Kazuki promised his mother he would take good care of himself. Looking at Kazuki's face, Oshin suddenly recalled the difficult times they had endured together. Oshin silently resolved that she would never let Kazuki be drawn into the war. She promised to protect him through it. At that moment, Oshin truly believed she had shielded Kazuki. In truth, against the tide of history, both of them were merely drifting like duckweed. Oshin saw off Kazuki, who had never left her side. Suddenly, she felt as if something vital had vanished from her life. Though Oshin had mentally prepared herself for this moment, she still lacked the courage to see Kazuki off at the station. That autumn, all the ship's crew had been conscripted into the army. Gasoline had also become scarce. Grandma Gue's fish shop could no longer sustain itself. Now she too had to leave, heading to Tokyo to rely on her son. Meanwhile, Kota had found a marriage prospect, the only daughter of a sake brewery. Kota no longer wished to stir up those bitter memories. The loss of his leg was the price he paid for his youth, a permanent reminder of his struggle. War transformed not only ordinary lives but also the commercial landscape. Businesses unrelated to the military collapsed because of raw material shortages. Meanwhile, Ryuzo, who traded with the army, saw his fortune rise. He planned to expand his military contracts by establishing a factory specializing in processed fish products. Oshin watched Ryuzo's excitement coldly. Some lost everything to the war, while others profited from it. Seeing these starkly different fates, Oshin felt a pang of pain. With oil rationed, ordinary fishing boats couldn't go out to sea. Almost all fish shops had closed. Only Oshin's remained open. To secure fish, customers suddenly demanded purchase limits per person. Early buyers snapped up all the fish, leaving later customers empty-handed. But those at the front of the line protested. They insisted buying as much as they wanted was their right. Words turned to arguments. Since opening the shop, Oshin had never faced such chaos. She never imagined war would so subtly disrupt people's lives. Ryuzo planned to open another factory, this one specializing in military uniforms. This plan meant that Oshin would no longer have the energy to run the fish shop. This was exactly the scenario Oshin dreaded most. As the first business the couple had ever started together, Oshin felt a deep attachment to the fish shop. The bleak prospect of closing it down, coupled with her fears about the war, nearly broke Oshin's heart. On the very day the garment factory opened, Ryuzo used his military connections to secure a new residence for the family. That same day, Kazuki returned home. Oshin never dreamed that in such turbulent times, her family could live in such a large house. To Oshin, it seemed almost too extravagant. But Ryuzo didn't think so. He believed Oshin had endured so many years of hardship and deserved to enjoy some comfort. Soon after, to unify public thought, Neighborhood watch groups were established across the region to suppress anti-war sentiment. Thanks to his military connections, Ryuzo was elected as the district's air raid warden. He saw it as contributing to the nation and threw himself into the role with enthusiasm. Oshin, however, felt no interest. Ryuzo's zeal only left her deeply perplexed. To her, the position was merely that of a Boka leader. No matter how high-ranking, she couldn't tell whether Ryuzo's approach of conforming to the times was right or wrong. That spring, Haruki and Daiki both entered middle school. Just then, Shoji arrived unannounced at their home. It turned out his eldest nephew, Kazuki's age, was training at the aviation school, and that aviation school was right near Oshin's house. Shoji had come this time to see his son one last time, because his son would soon be heading off to the battlefield. Ryuzo not only warmly welcomed his brother but also asked Oshin to pack extra things for him to take back. Her brother was about to send his own son to war. Money could never make up for that, but she would help him however she could. The next day, Shoji returned to his hometown. Watching her brother's retreating figure, Oshin was filled with sorrow. The resentment she had long harbored toward him vanished in that moment, yet a shadow still lingered in Oshin's heart. Through her brother Shoji, Oshin suddenly felt the cruelty of war beginning to touch her own life. The following year, Kazuki successfully entered Kyoto Imperial University. At that time, the radio broadcast daily reports of glorious victories in the Pacific. Despite living in material poverty, the national morale remained high. However, this lasted only a little over a year. The following year, the war situation began to deteriorate. In the autumn of 1943, the government revoked the deferment of conscription for liberal arts students. 20-year-old Kazuki had no choice but to abandon his university studies and return home. Oshin had never imagined students would be drafted too. This came as a complete shock to her. The very thing Oshin had feared had finally come to pass. She recounted to Kazuki the story of Shota, the deserting soldier she had met as a child. Though Kazuki understood his mother's feelings, he had no choice. Many boys as young as 14 or 15 were being sent to the front lines. Now, Kazuki too had to march to the battlefield. For the sake of his parents and younger siblings, Oshin felt her heart wrench in agony. Just then, Ryuzo entered the room. With matters having reached this point, there was likely no turning back for Kazuki. All that remained was to send him off with a smile. After all, seeing his mother cry and suffer would only torment Kazuki further. Yet Ryuzo's consolation felt utterly hollow before a mother's grief. At this moment, perhaps only Kazuki himself could truly understand Oshin's pain. An indescribable regret tore at Oshin's heart. She knew that one person opposing the war was powerless. Despite this, she still chose to oppose the war. On the day of his enlistment, Kazuki refused the farewell ceremony organized by the neighbors. Without any grand farewell, he left home alone. Oshin endured the pain to respect Kazuki's wishes. From that day on, Kazuki cut off all contact with his family. It wasn't until May 1944 that Kazuki finally wrote a letter home. He had been granted permission to meet his family. With a heart full of excitement, Oshin and Kanako took a long train ride to see Kazuki. No one could have imagined that this brief reunion would be their final farewell. Oshin watched her son depart once more, heading toward the battlefield. A wave of intense hatred for the war surged within her, for war had mercilessly snatched her son from her grasp. July 7, 1945. With the fall of Saipan, American bombing raids on the homeland became increasingly frequent. Unnoticed, the war had already reached Oshin's doorstep. Unable to rest, Oshin wrote to Kamijiro and asked him to find out Kazuki's whereabouts. Due to military secrecy, Kamijiro personally delivered the message. He informed Oshin that Kazuki's unit had been deployed south. The south might be safer than the homeland, as American forces had already occupied Japan's surrounding waters and could invade at any moment. Rather than worrying about Kazuki, she should focus on the children back home. Learning Kazuki was in a safe place, Oshin finally breathed a sigh of relief. Yet her heart sank again upon hearing Japan might face bombing raids. She never imagined Japan would ever face such a day. To protect her young daughter, Oshin had no choice but to steel her heart and send her to the countryside. With the fall of Guam, the situation at home grew increasingly dire. Japan prepared for a decisive battle against the Americans on Japanese soil. It was in this environment that Haruki suddenly ran away from home and secretly enlisted as a youth airman. Oshin was utterly devastated. From late November that year, air raids centered on Tokyo grew increasingly frequent. No one knew when bombs might fall on their own heads. Only then did Oshin realize she had been right to send her little girl to the countryside. Having toiled through most of her life, Oshin now had no choice but to let her 3 children leave her and journey far away. This was the most agonizing moment of her life. Yet the cruelty of war was far from over. More and more neighbors received notices of their children's deaths in battle. Even the Air Force unit Haruki had joined was bombed. The situation grew increasingly dire. Oshin had no time to confirm Haruki's fate. That very night, American bombers flew over Oshin's head. Now the flames of war had reached her own doorstep. The price for the militarists' past actions was now being paid by ordinary citizens. Ryuzo's factory was reduced to ashes in the air raid. Oshin risked her life to fight the flames. She had to protect this home. She couldn't bear the thought of her 3 children returning to find no place to call home. Oshin believed this was her duty as a mother. Countless homes were reduced to ashes in the bombing. Japan finally tasted the bitter fruit of war. Soon after, Oshin suddenly received news of Kazuki's death. The emperor summoned men to battle with a red draft notice, only to announce their deaths with a white telegram of condolence. Oshin refused to believe what was right in front of her. She clung to the conviction that Kazuki was still alive. This belief became the pillar of her spirit, sustaining her through the years to come. Less than a month later, the American forces dropped 2 new types of bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Soon after, news spread that the war was nearing its end. On that very day, Oshin unexpectedly received a letter from Haruki. The letter stated he had completed training and would soon be deployed to the front lines. Yet that very noon, the emperor announced Japan's unconditional surrender. Oshin's heart filled with dread. If Haruki hadn't received the notice, fate would be too cruel. Days later, Oshin reluctantly returned home to seek her brother's help. Though her brother's life had improved considerably, he remained as cold and unfeeling as ever. Oshin had much she wished to tell him, but faced with his indifference, she lost all desire to speak. She blamed herself for being too naive. This visit would simply be a memory of her hometown. The long journey didn't tire Oshin, but she felt utterly humiliated. She didn't resent her brother and sister-in-law for refusing to lend her money. She only hated herself for ever thinking to ask others for help. Oshin resolved to continue her black market dealings. No matter how many times the police arrested her, she would persist. On the very day Oshin returned, Kazuki's comrades suddenly came back to the country. Oshin's last shred of hope shattered. The truth she had always refused to believe had now become reality. With a heart filled with despair, she opened the diary Kazuki had written. Oshin understood she should oppose the war, yet she felt powerless to resist. That night, she took out the harmonica Shota had given her and played it, tears streaming down her face. This was her funeral song for the husband and son she'd lost in the war. The deep affection Shota had poured into that harmonica when he gave it to her, Oshin only truly grasped today. This realization pierced her heart like a knife. The very next morning, Kanako also slipped away from the house without a trace. Where she went, Oshin had no idea. Without Kanako's help, Oshin struggled alone to keep the household afloat. Fortunately, Grandma Gue unexpectedly returned from Tokyo shortly after. This was a godsend for Oshin. Not only was housing secured, but she could also resume selling fish door to door. On the very day Oshin moved, Kanako suddenly sent a letter home. Its contents were merely a few brief greetings. Through these words, Oshin could not discern Kanako's current circumstances. Moreover, the envelope bore no return address. Oshin could only guess from the postmark that Kanako was in Tokyo, but what exactly Kanako was doing there remained unknown to Oshin. With Grandma Gue's support, Oshin resolved to start anew. This wasn't the first time in her life she'd faced such a beginning. In her heart, she repeatedly vowed, what she'd lost in the war, she would reclaim. With nothing left, Oshin could only manage a small farm to barely sustain her family. By this time, Oshin was already 50 years old. During the 4 years Kanako had been away from Oshin, she had persistently sent money home each month to support Oshin's living expenses. Yet, she never once revealed her address. Thus, Oshin remained completely unaware of Kanako's circumstances. Oshin treated Kanako as if she were her own flesh and blood. So, every time she saw the money Kanako sent, Oshin felt a pang of sadness. She understood that although the war had long ended, its shadow still lingered in Kanako's heart. With Kota's support, the 50-year-old Oshin embarked on a new chapter. To get the new shop up and running, Haruki and Daiki both gave up college to help their mother with the business. Oshin resolved that this time, failure was not an option. Beyond selling fresh fish, the new shop also purchased vegetables from local farmers to sell. Profits were meager, yet her life felt fulfilling. But just then, a letter shattered the tranquility once more. Ken had found Kanako in Tokyo. Upon hearing this, Oshin had only one thought: find Kanako immediately. She left the shop in a hurry and rushed alone to Tokyo. With Ken's help, Oshin located Kanako at a US military base. Yet the moment she saw her mother, Kanako felt utterly ashamed. Oshin knew Kanako had done what she did to support the family and didn't blame her. All these years, she hadn't touched a single yen of the money Kanako had sent her. She returned every penny to Kanako, urging her to settle her debts in Tokyo. Thus, at Oshin's insistence, Kanako abandoned everything in Tokyo. But when Oshin returned home, trouble had struck the fish shop. It turned out that in her haste to find Kanako, Oshin had forgotten to pay the supplier. The wholesaler, not receiving payment, had taken all the goods away. Though the business suffered a setback, Kanako's safe return was Oshin's greatest comfort. But just as Oshin's life was settling back into calm, Daiki suddenly made a request that Oshin found hard to accept: to become an apprentice at a pottery kiln. Oshin dismissed Daiki's ambition as unrealistic and refused to engage. Unexpectedly, days later, Daiki left behind only an address and departed resolutely. Mastering ceramics requires at least a decade of dedication. Oshin recalled Keo's own dream of becoming an artist. Daiki's pursuit of ceramic art shared a connection with painting, if only to fulfill Keo's unfulfilled wish. This thought seemed to bring Oshin some solace. Though she agreed to let Daiki pursue his dream, a deep sense of emptiness lingered in her heart. Yet what she never anticipated was that Daiki wasn't the only one who would betray her. Haruki refused to settle for running a small fish shop his entire life. His ambition was to open a grand department store. Ignoring Oshin's objections, he set off alone for Tokyo to seek his fortune. Oshin suddenly lost two capable assistants, yet she harbored no resentment, believing children should choose their own paths according to their will. This had always been Oshin's conviction. The next day, both fish and vegetable supplies increased. After closing the shop, Oshin rode her tricycle motorcycle to the factory district, selling fish and vegetables to workers leaving their shifts. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. During this time, Oshin's business flourished. Haruki's situation in Tokyo, however, was far from promising. Without a university degree, he could only secure menial delivery work at a department store. Only now did he realize the importance of formal education. Frustrated by the gap between his dreams and reality, Haruki quit his job at the department store and vanished without a trace. Oshin kept her worries to herself, though her heart was filled with anxiety. Thus, the year ended in a whirlwind of busyness. One day, an unexpected visitor arrived at their door. Before his death, Kazuki had entrusted Kawamura to care for Kanako in his place. To fulfill this dying wish, Kawamura came not only to see Oshin, but also to carry out an important task: to propose to Kanako. Yet Kanako's heart belonged solely to Kazuki. She had no intention of marrying anyone. After the war, Kawamura had amassed considerable wealth through black market dealings, speculation and resale. Though the origins of his money were somewhat shady, Oshin believed that as Kazuki's close friend, Kawamura's character was beyond reproach. Therefore, she gave serious consideration to the marriage proposal. Moreover, Haruki had been completely out of touch since leaving the Tokyo department store. At that moment, Oshin was suddenly struck by a realization. Her relentless pursuit of business success ultimately stemmed from her desire for her children to have a better life. Yet within Kanako's heart, alongside her feelings for Kazuki, lay an unresolved emotional burden: the painful memories of her time at the US military base in Tokyo. Thus, she bluntly told Kawamura she was unworthy of marriage. Kanako had hoped this confession would dissuade Kawamura from pursuing the marriage, but Kawamura showed no objection. He understood that in post-war life, everyone struggled desperately just to survive. Many sold not only their bodies but their very souls. Kawamura's words finally moved Kanako. This was precisely the outcome Oshin had hoped for. Yet just as things began moving in a positive direction, Haruki suddenly returned home alone, head hanging low. During his time away, he had endured the hardships of having no formal education. This time, he willingly followed his mother to sell fish. He wanted to test how far he could go without academic credentials. To create opportunities for Haruki, Oshin envisioned expanding the shop. She always believed hard work alone could build a business. To help her mother achieve this dream, Kanako made a difficult decision. She approached Kawamura and agreed to marry him, but only on one condition: that he lease the land in front of the station to her mother. To her surprise, Kawamura readily agreed. Kawamura did not want money to affect their relationship. After completing the land transfer paperwork, he did not mention marriage. In that moment, Kawamura seemed so noble in Kanako's eyes. Although her feelings for him were different from her feelings for Kazuki, he at least seemed like someone she could trust with her life. Yet the very next morning, newspapers reported Kawamura's assassination. That same day, Oshin received the deed transferring the 330 square meter plot in front of the station. For Kawamura, returning alone to his hometown after Kazuki's death felt like a heavy burden of guilt. He tried to atone by giving up the land. It seemed war's cruelty extended even to its survivors. Oshin buried Kawamura's unclaimed remains beside Kazuki's grave. Witnessing two young men taken by war, she felt profound grief. Oshin resolved that, since Kawamura had left her the land, she would build her future on it. This seemed the only way to honor his kindness. For more years passed quickly, bringing profound societal change. Before she knew it, Haruki had reached marriageable age. A new problem presented itself to Oshin. Haruki and the family servant, Yuki, had fallen deeply in love. They soon became intimate. Kanako witnessed everything. Oshin admired Yuki's gentle and virtuous nature, yet she was startled to learn about their relationship. Truthfully, Oshin was quite satisfied with Yuki's character. She felt that while a girl like Yuki might not be much help in business, she would certainly be capable of managing a household. However, just as Oshin had chosen Yuki to be Haruki's wife, Haruki secretly went to Tokyo to meet another woman. Upon his return, he suddenly proposed transforming Tamura's store into a supermarket. The concept of a supermarket was unfamiliar to Oshin, so she didn't agree immediately. To understand Haruki's true intentions, Oshin traveled to Tokyo the next day. She wanted to see for herself what kind of supermarket Haruki was talking about. This marked another turning point in Oshin's turbulent life. After learning about it, Oshin felt that perhaps the time had truly come to open a supermarket. However, opening a supermarket required a substantial amount of capital. Just then, Haruki announced he intended to marry a girl named Akemi. Akemi's father was a garment manufacturer who would provide funds and equipment for the store after the marriage. Oshin had never imagined Haruki would make such a choice. She was determined that he take responsibility for Yuki. That day, the atmosphere at home felt unusually tense. Meanwhile, Yuki remained unaware of what was happening inside the family. Her heart was filled with unease. Haruki was willing to sacrifice his relationship with Yuki to secure a business partner. He was essentially trading his marriage for financial backing to fulfill Haruki's dream of opening a supermarket. A disheartened Yuki chose to give up. Oshin could not forgive Haruki's treatment of Yuki, so she resolved that even if it meant severing her relationship with Haruki, she would keep Yuki by her side and care for her properly. This was her way of compensating Yuki. The very next morning, Yuki disappeared without telling anyone. Oshin understood Haruki's marriage to Akemi wasn't about love, but solely for the supermarket. She rejected the match without hesitation. But for Haruki, achieving his dream justified marrying as many times as necessary. Just as mother and son reached an impasse, Daiki brought news of Yuki. It turned out Yuki hadn't returned home but sought work at the pottery kiln where Daiki apprenticed. Deep down, Daiki also harbored special feelings for Yuki. Oshin had always prioritized her business over her children's upbringing. She blamed herself for raising Haruki into such a heartless man. Yet Haruki was willing to sacrifice his own marriage to pursue his dreams. His passion eventually moved Oshin. With mixed feelings, she agreed to Haruki and Akemi's marriage. Oshin made no special arrangements to show the bride to be the family's actual situation. Akemi's father offered to fund the construction of Oshin's supermarket, including all the equipment. There was just one condition: Oshin had to reserve a space inside the store for his clothing business. Oshin was annoyed by Akemi's father meddling in their affairs. For years, she had always forged her own path through life with her own strength. To Oshin, Akemi's father's attitude felt like a deep personal insult. Thus, upon their first meeting, Oshin didn't form a favorable impression of either father or daughter. However, Oshin also understood that running a supermarket was the trend of the future, and it required a substantial amount of capital. She still had her doubts about the whole idea. Kota believed Oshin's shop had prime location, and theoretically possessed all the ingredients for success. With Kota's encouragement, Oshin finally resolved to proceed. To prevent Akemi's father from interfering in the new store, Oshin successfully secured a bank loan with Kota as guarantor. Right after the money came through, Akemi's father showed up with a designer to plan the new store. He insisted on completely demolishing the existing shop and rebuilding it from scratch. He was acting as if he owned the place. This shop was Oshin's own creation, and she wouldn't let anyone boss her around. She insisted on just using the existing building and making the most of the money they had. Opening a supermarket at 55 was not just a new start for Oshin, it was also a challenge to Akemi's father. The new store wasn't set up for Akemi's father to sell clothes at all. This undoubtedly surprised Takuya. He was a well-connected figure in business circles, with many eager to partner with him. He never imagined Oshin would refuse him today. Still, Oshin didn't say no outright. If he could offer wholesale prices, she might consider it. Takuya finally recognized Oshin's strength and never mentioned the new store again. Nevertheless, he interfered in Akemi and Haruki's post-marriage life. He planned to buy an apartment near the new store, so the newlyweds could live separately from the family. Oshin made her demands crystal clear to Akemi face-to-face. The prerequisite for their marriage was that they must live in the store. Furthermore, after marriage, Akemi would be responsible for all household chores. Akemi had been pampered since childhood. At home, she had never done any work, nor had she ever heard a harsh word. Oshin's stance was undoubtedly a crushing blow to her. Akemi's mother couldn't swallow her pride. Takuya, however, admired Oshin's boldness. A woman funding a supermarket herself was already remarkable. Moreover, it was rare to find a mother-in-law who dared to speak harshly to her daughter-in-law these days. Therefore, he still supported their marriage. With things escalating to this point, Oshin couldn't help but think of Kazuki. If Kazuki were still alive, she wouldn't be so troubled. Oshin thought Haruki would at least stand up for himself, maybe even run away from home, giving up his inheritance to marry Akemi. But one thought filled her with dread, the thought of running the soon-to-be-completed store all by herself. But what Oshin didn't expect was that Haruki not only refused to run away, but also gave in to her. Anyway, even without the Takuya family's help, the supermarket can still open. Let's just find a bride your mother likes and call off the marriage with Akemi. Oshin retorted, "You're such a coward. If you truly want to marry, then go and convince her properly." But the very next day, Takuya arrived at their doorstep with Akemi to apologize. Not only did he agree to all of Oshin's demands, he also voluntarily took on all the wedding expenses. The only thing that displeased Oshin was that Haruki and Akemi's wedding would be held at her parents' home. This was also a significant blow to Oshin, but at this point, refusing Takuya's arrangements would inevitably seem unfeeling. The new store had already depleted all the family's savings. Oshin could only give them a simple wedding. Given how far Takuya had gone, Oshin reluctantly swallowed her pride and agreed. After all, she had to consider the Takuya family's reputation in the business world. After Haruki and Akemi's honeymoon ended, Kanako prepared a lavish dinner and waited with Oshin for the newlyweds' return. Unexpectedly, the couple had detoured to Akemi's family home in Nagoya. For the newlyweds to visit the bride's family first made no sense to Oshin. Oshin felt deeply displeased. The next day, when Haruki and Akemi returned, Oshin gave them a cold reception. Thus, tension between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law arose from the very first day. Oshin assigned Akemi all the household chores, while Kanako went to help at the shop. Akemi was far from pleased with this arrangement. She complained to Haruki that she had hoped to knit sweaters comfortably at home after marriage. Haruki, at a loss, sought Kanako's help to swap roles with Akemi, but cleaning fish at the shop was no easy task, likely 10 times harder than housework. Haruki knew this well and reluctantly dropped the idea. Akemi, accustomed to a pampered life at her parents' home, had no clue where to begin with chores. On the first day, Kanako finished her shop duties before helping Akemi prepare dinner for the family. At the same time, Kanako meticulously explained each task Akemi would need to handle daily. Hearing this sent Akemi into a panic, so she secretly slipped back to her parents' home without telling anyone. This outcome left Oshin utterly speechless. Akemi had barely been part of the family for half a day before running away. It seemed maintaining a good relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law was no easy feat. Seeing Haruki's distraught state, Oshin felt both pity and frustration. The next day, defying his mother's objections, Haruki stubbornly went to fetch Akemi back, but they ended up going the wrong way. Akemi returned on her own, accompanied by her father, Takuya. Takuya had come to get to the bottom of things before deciding whether to let them divorce. After hearing Kanako list all the chores, Akemi felt utterly incapable of handling them. Though she and Haruki shared affection, if she couldn't get along with her mother-in-law, their future wouldn't be happy. At this point, Oshin had no choice but to compromise with her daughter-in-law. Oshin knew the old ways of treating daughters-in-law wouldn't work in this era, so she made a significant concession. The conflict between mother and daughter-in-law was resolved. The heaviness in Akemi's heart finally lifted. From then on, Akemi moved freely within the household without fear. The relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law became solely Oshin's problem. Oshin could only let Akemi manage the household according to her own ideas. No matter how much Akemi overstepped, Oshin didn't say another word against her. And so, another year passed in a flurry of activity. On New Year's Eve, after closing the shop, Haruki and Akemi went skiing. Only Oshin and Kanako remained at home. In the quiet of the evening, they saw the old year out and welcomed the new one. Daiki kept vigil before the kiln for 3 days and nights. His own creations were inside. This moment would determine whether his master approved of him. Yuki kept watch alongside Daiki. By spending day and night together, they gradually became inseparable, though Oshin harbored some reservations about their union. Seeing Daiki's sincerity, she ultimately consented. Oshin was deeply satisfied with Yuki as her daughter-in-law. After all, mutual understanding was the foundation of a happy marriage. Oshin had wanted Daiki to help manage the new shop, but he had fallen in love with ceramic art and wanted to follow his own path. For Ko, this was a form of solace. Watching Daiki steadily make his own way, Oshin felt deeply reassured. Come spring, Daiki and Yuki held a simple wedding ceremony at the pottery kiln. Oshin had intended to contribute funds for Daiki's wedding, but Daiki politely declined. His fellow apprentices pooled their money to host a celebratory banquet for Daiki and Yuki. Thus, without wedding attire or elaborate rituals, they were married under the witness of their master and mistress. Watching Daiki and Yuki quietly nestled together, Oshin felt deeply moved. They were so ordinary, simple, yet resolute. Compared to Haruki and Akemi's wedding, Oshin felt Daiki's ceremony held far greater meaning, for she believed that even if parents spent money on a grand wedding, an incompatible couple would remain incompatible, even without a big ceremony. True happiness comes from two hearts being in sync. Oshin's comment about the meaning of weddings deeply upset Akemi, so while her mother-in-law and Kanako were attending the wedding, she used money from her parents to dine out with Haruki. When Oshin and Kanako returned that evening, they could only eat leftovers from lunch. Due to differing values, the tension between Oshin and Akemi flared once more. Haruki saw nothing wrong with Akemi spending her family's money. He felt his mother was being overly demanding of her daughter-in-law. Oshin had raised both Haruki and Daiki with the same principles. She never imagined they would turn out so different as adults. Oshin believed money was at the root of all this. She resolved that the new shop absolutely must not fail. With 2 cash registers installed, the new store was about to open. Before opening, she asked her daughter-in-law to familiarize herself with the shop's operations for any eventuality. Akemi, however, made excuses, insisting she was only responsible for household chores. After Oshin spent ages explaining the reasoning, she was met with disdain from her daughter-in-law, so she turned to her son, Haruki. The shop would eventually be inherited by him and his wife. As the wife of a merchant, Akemi should also possess a diligent spirit. Oshin never imagined Haruki would share the same attitude. Oshin had gone through hardships from her own mother-in-law, and now she was dealing with disdain from her daughter-in-law. Times truly had changed. Having toiled her entire life, Oshin understood the hardship of every penny and grain of rice. She had always taught her children diligence and frugality. Yet now, not only was she looked down upon by her daughter-in-law, but Haruki himself no longer wished to hear her reminisce about the past. To prepare for the new shop's opening, Haruki had privately hired an assistant without consulting Oshin. Furthermore, he had secretly called back his younger sister Miho, who was attending university. Miho was utterly unwilling, especially when she saw her sister-in-law sitting idly by. She was furious. Oshin tried to persuade Miho, reminding her that the family had finally regained a peaceful life. Miho believed Oshin's excessive politeness was what emboldened her sister-in-law, but Oshin knew deep down that reasoning with the unreasonable was futile. Unable to swallow her pride, Miho confronted her brother Haruki to state her position. Left speechless by his sister's rebuke, Haruki turned to his mother to vent. Miho has become like a wild horse, she needs a good lesson. Yet Oshin found Miho's arguments quite reasonable. These were precisely the thoughts a mother-in-law dared not voice aloud. So, Oshin quietly agreed with what Miho had said. Yet just 2 days before the new shop's grand opening, Akemi suddenly discovered she was pregnant. Shortly after, Takuya and his wife arrived. insisting on taking Akemi back to her parents' home to rest, though Oshin was somewhat reluctant. She quickly reconsidered. With the new store opening, they were already short-staffed. Keeping Akemi at home wouldn't help at all, she'd only add to the trouble. Thus, the issue of Akemi was finally resolved. Soon, the day of the supermarket's grand opening arrived. That day, Daiki took leave from the pottery kiln to return home. Takuya also brought 2 assistants from Nagoya. A supermarket was a novelty on the commercial street. So on opening day, the store attracted a large crowd. Seeing the new store's prosperity, Oshin recalled the hardships of the past and felt deeply moved. However, the new store's success also brought considerable trouble. Oshin's practice of selling goods at low prices quickly drew opposition from other shopkeepers, but Oshin stood her ground. She believed a merchant's duty was to the customer. Selling affordable, needed goods was her principle, and setting her own prices was her right. Business, she insisted, was about free competition. Her stance left the Merchants Association speechless, and they eventually left in frustration. This minor incident did nothing to slow Oshin's progress. Haruki, trying to impress others, wanted to marry his sister, who was at university, off to one of his employees. Unexpectedly, this idea sparked a huge uproar at home. Haruki's selfishness infuriated his mother beyond measure. No matter how dire the family's financial situation became, Oshin insisted Miho complete her university education. However, the newly opened supermarket sold goods at rock-bottom prices to customers, leaving pitifully low profits. They couldn't repay the bank loan anytime soon. Even Miho's tuition became a problem. To raise Miho's tuition, Oshin decided to add a deli section to the store. Beyond that, Oshin insisted on driving over 10 kilometers to the coast daily to buy fresh fish directly from fishing boats. Oshin always followed her rule: give customers good products at fair prices. Miho resented her brother's arrangements and secretly returned alone to Nagoya University. In the days that followed, Oshin faithfully mailed Miho sufficient living expenses each month. Though Miho understood the family's current financial struggles, she indulged her boyfriend's preferences, immersing herself nightly in the glitz and glamour of the city. She wouldn't return to her residence until well past midnight. Her landlord, unable to bear it any longer, stepped in to lecture her on behalf of her mother. Miho had a sudden change of heart. She resolved to break up with her boyfriend and even withdrew from university. Oshin couldn't fathom what had truly happened to her daughter. Her heart remained heavy with unease. It wasn't until the shop closed that day that Miho finally spoke the truth. She felt her university life was nothing but wasted time. Returning to help with the family business felt far more meaningful. Moreover, through her interactions with her Nagoya boyfriend, she realized Yuto was the one truly suited for her. Oshin was strongly against Miho's choice. She refused to let her daughter sacrifice her future for the sake of the shop, but Miho was resolute she would not return to school under any circumstances. The very next morning, Miho sought out Yuto and proposed becoming his wife. Unexpectedly, Yuto not only refused but suddenly grew distant toward her. This outcome completely caught Miho off guard. Then Yuto announced his resignation. It wasn't that Yuto disliked Miho. He wanted her to choose the person most suited for her. At the same time, he didn't want to betray Kaniko's investment in Miho's education. Yuto's sincerity moved Oshin. She finally relinquished her insistence on Miho attending university and resolved to let Miho chart her own life path. 3 busy months passed in this manner. By then, Akemi, persuaded by her father, had no choice but to return home. Leveraging her pregnancy, Akemi began ordering Kanako around to handle household chores. This infuriated Oshin, who firmly believed Kanako was not merely a servant in this household. Akemi naturally couldn't comprehend Oshin's affection for Kanako, so after staying less than a month, she returned to her parents' home. This time, Oshin's feelings toward her daughter-in-law went far beyond mere anger. Kanako's well-intentioned help with Akemi's chores unexpectedly brought trouble upon herself. Takuya introduced a potential match for Kanako. Oshin initially thought it was a good thing, but upon learning the suitor was a 55-year-old man, her face immediately darkened. She absolutely refused to consent to this match. But Kanako was a sensible woman. She understood she was unwanted in this household, so she resolved to accept Takuya's arrangement. Yet Oshin's feelings for Kanako, though not motherly, surpassed those of a mother. For Kanako's sake, Oshin could banish Akemi from returning home. She could even sever ties with Haruki, her own son, for to betray Kanako would be to betray the memory of the late Kazuki. Thanks to Oshin's persistence, Kanako's situation was finally resolved. By late autumn, Akemi gave birth to a healthy baby boy at her parents' home. The family now had a grandson, an heir to carry on the name, and Oshin was overjoyed. Oshin repeatedly urged Haruki to name the child after Ryuzo, but when Haruki returned, he announced the family had already chosen the name Takuya. Oshin considered this an unforgivable offense. In protest, and to vent her anger, she deliberately skipped her grandson's celebration banquet. It wasn't until the 35th day that Akemi returned home with the baby. Haruki reorganized the household responsibilities. From then on, Kanako would handle all domestic duties, while Akemi focused solely on childcare. Thus, after finishing her work at the store, Kanako also had to manage the entire family's daily life. Fortunately, domestic life gradually returned to calm. The following spring, Miho and Yuto held their wedding. Soon after, a grand sale was held to commemorate the store's first anniversary. Oshin's supermarket had achieved success. Another decade passed. By this time, Oshin was already 67 years old. During this period, the store had doubled in size, and the staff had grown to 20 employees. To expand operations, Haruki and Yuto also began considering opening a branch store. After much deliberation, Oshin felt the timing was right. Her condition, however, was that she must help Daiki establish his own kiln. Oshin believed Daiki and Yuki, who had endured hardships to dedicate themselves to ceramics, were more deserving than anyone. Regarding the kiln, no matter the cost, Oshin would not tolerate anyone questioning her decision. Helping Daiki become self-reliant was her promise to Miss Ko. But Daiki, after leaving home, was determined not to trouble his mother ever again. He would carve his own path through life with his own hands. But Oshin was now 67 years old. If anything happened to her, Daiki would have no one left to rely on. Moved by Oshin's sincerity, the kiln master finally agreed to let Daiki branch out. Yet with the shop preparing to open a new location, funding Daiki's kiln became problematic again. Oshin could only turn to Kota for help. Kota, who felt indebted to Ko from his youth, was more than willing to assist her child. Thus, Oshin used the savings she had secretly set aside for Kanako's future as collateral, securing Kota's investment to build Daiki's kiln. After nearly 40 years, the promise Oshin had kept in her heart was finally fulfilled. Watching Daiki concentrate on crafting ceramics, she silently savored the joy within her. Soon, construction began on store No. 2 and No. 3. At the same time, Daiki's kiln and workshop also broke ground. This was a huge gamble for Oshin, who invested a significant portion of her life savings into it. That autumn, both Store No. 2 and Store No. 3 opened their doors one after another. The stores gained people's trust through their solid foundation, drawing crowds of customers daily. Away and Yuto had their wishes fulfilled. Daiki finally achieved his lifelong dream of establishing his own kiln. On the day the new workshop was completed, Oshin and Kanako visited Daiki's new home together. Yuki never dreamed she'd live in such a splendid house in her lifetime. She was filled with gratitude toward her mother. Yet, tragedy struck the day before the move. Yuki was killed in a car accident. To prevent scandal or more heartbreak, Oshin forbade Haruki from attending Yuki's funeral. Akemi was shaken and hurt by this, but Oshin, overwhelmed by grief, could care little for such consequences. Yuki's death aroused Akemi's suspicions. Haruki and Yuki's secret affair was finally exposed. Enraged, Akemi took the children back to her parents' home. Oshin had no choice but to swallow her pride and compromise yet again. Akemi's mother had always spoken harshly to Oshin, yet Oshin had opened the supermarket without spending a single yen of the Takuya family's money, and it was thanks to the supermarket that the Takuya family's excess stock could finally be sold. Takuya understood this best of all. Amidst the Takuya family's internal quarrels, Oshin listened quietly, not uttering a single word of rebuttal, for her purpose in coming was singular: to bring Akemi home. Yet Oshin's concessions did not bring harmony to the young couple. Haruki and Akemi's relationship grew even more strained. Because of Yuki's death, Akemi kept bringing up Yuki's death day after day. Haruki began avoiding coming home. Oshin urged Akemi to restrain herself for the children's sake. Akemi, unable to argue, chose to back down for the time being. Soon, year-end arrived, and the supermarket held its traditional clearance sale. Even Oshin and Miho joined to help. Kanako brought the children along. Amid the busy scene, they saw out the old year and welcomed the new one. But Akemi never showed her face. It turned out Akemi had taken the children traveling as soon as winter break began. Only then did Oshin realize Haruki had been living alone all this time. Seeing Haruki and Akemi grow so distant, Oshin felt deeply troubled. But what troubled her even more was the future of Daiki and his father. It was then Oshin conceived the idea of bringing Kanako and Daiki together as a family. Yet her earnest hopes were not fulfilled. Daiki's heart belonged solely to Yuki, and his feelings for Kanako were those of a brother. Kanako knew no woman but Yuki could ever enter Daiki's heart, so she endured the pain within, mutually rejecting Daiki. Seeing Kanako so calm, Oshin felt even more sympathy for her. What had been meant to help Kanako ended up hurting her instead. That February, Daiki fired his kiln for the first time. His work received high praise. As a potter, Daiki had taken a solid first step. That same May, the fourth and fifth branches of the shop opened successively. Yet fear gripped Oshin's heart. Especially Haruki's almost obsessive drive for business success unsettled her. Soon after, her older brother and sister-in-law from their hometown also came to live with them. They were doing well now, their children all working. The entire family relocated to town. Gazing at her brother and sister-in-law's weathered faces, Oshin couldn't help but reflect on her own long and arduous journey. Her heart filled with profound emotion. That September, Haruki forcibly opened the family's sixth branch. While the business flourished like the rising sun, a deep rift emerged in his marriage. Haruki and Akemi fought constantly at home, causing their son to become rebellious. Failing as a mother, Akemi seemed to lose her purpose overnight. Haruki was also deeply shaken. To mend the cracks within their family, Haruki and Akemi suddenly asked Oshin to come and live with them. They believed the hardships grandma had endured would be the best education for their grandson. Considering her own age of 68 and Kanako's future, Oshin decided to live with Haruki and Akemi. Kanako, unmarried, had no choice but to rely on Haruki and Akemi, who were not her blood relatives. Oshin felt deeply for her and was determined to help Kanako become independent within her lifetime. At Oshin's insistence, Haruki personally took charge of finding a storefront for Kanako. Kanako handed over all her savings accumulated over more than a decade to Haruki for the new shop setup. Haruki advised against touching the money. Besides, only he and Miho knew the hardships Kanako had endured. As time passed, fewer people would remember. When he retired, the next generation might not be able to care for Kanako properly. That's when this money would serve its purpose. Haruki met every demand Kanako had for the handicraft shop, doing his utmost to satisfy her. Watching Haruki's efforts for Kanako, Oshin and Daiki felt deeply moved. They both understood exactly what sacrifices Kanako had made for the family. Understanding what she had sacrificed, Haruki and Daiki promised to take good care of Kanako. Just as they were talking, Kanako returned from outside. Oshin quietly wiped away her tears and greeted Kanako with a calm, smiling face. Having weathered poverty together, their bond was stronger than gold. By year's end, Oshin ended her long-term arrangement with Kanako. Kanako's handicraft shop opened on the street, marking her path to independence. 3 years later, the Tamura family owned 16 branches. Oshin celebrated her 81st birthday. As a gift for his mother, Haruki resolved to mobilize the entire family's resources to build a large supermarket. Yet the location chosen for the 17th branch left Oshin utterly stunned. The new store's opening would inevitably impact the food shop's business. Since stepping back, Oshin had resolved never to interfere with the shops again. Even if they went bankrupt, she would not intervene. But this time, Kota's interests were at stake. She could not stand idly by. However, Haruki had already invested the family's entire fortune into the new store. Asking him to back out now was impossible. That day, Oshin visited Kota. She knew apologies would be futile, yet she couldn't hold back from pouring out her grief and resentment to him. Kota, however, didn't utter a single word of blame toward Oshin. He felt that if Haruki's store truly drove his grocery shop out of business, it might not be such a bad thing for his grandchildren. Only when someone reaches the lowest point in life can they calmly reflect on it. Disappointed by Haruki's actions, Oshin grew indifferent to the new store's progress. By March of the following year, the 17th supermarket was completed. It was then that Kota unexpectedly visited Oshin. Oshin sensed something was amiss, yet she never imagined Kota would bring up a matter of vital importance to the Tamura family's fate. It turned out that another, even more capital-rich supermarket chain was planning to enter the same street. Kota urged Oshin to devise a countermeasure immediately. Unexpectedly, after a moment of worry, Oshin smiled. Oshin wasn't afraid of bankruptcy, since she had built the Tamura supermarket from scratch with her own hands. Even if they had to start over from scratch, it could actually be a good lesson, because it would be an excellent lesson for both Haruki and her grandson. The very next morning, Oshin quietly slipped out alone. setting off on a journey by herself. No one could guess why Oshin left home on the very day the new store opened. During the month she was away, Oshin revisited every place she had ever lived. In that time, she re-examined the path her life had taken. Oshin finally discovered what had been missing in her life. After her journey, she visited Kota's home again. She assumed everything was settled, but she found that Kota had not given up his land. Oshin couldn't fathom why Kota would act this way. For Kota, as long as he refused to sign, the Tamura family's assets could be saved. He didn't want Oshin to suffer again. That's why he had anxiously awaited her return for over a month. However, Kota's actions weren't for the Tamura family, they were solely for Oshin. This time, however, Oshin did not accept Kota's kindness. Through her journey, she had come to see the Tamura family's development as distorted. It was time for Haruki and the family to reflect, to look back on the path they'd taken and see where they'd gone wrong. This was also a mother's final act of duty toward her children. If Haruki stumbled today and could never rise again, it would be his own fault for lacking ambition and capability. Oshin was mentally prepared for the Tamura family's bankruptcy, so she felt no anxiety. That very year, at year's end, the capital-rich supermarket opened with great fanfare in front of the station. By comparison, the Tamura family supermarket seemed somewhat overshadowed. The 17th branch's equipment costs were crippling, with profits from the other 16 stores unable to cover the bank loans. Haruki faced bankruptcy. When the store prospered, Akemi could endure the humiliation at home. Now, with Haruki about to lose everything, Akemi suddenly demanded a divorce. For Haruki, the business failure left him without the strength to refuse her request. But Oshin vehemently opposed the divorce. She had sacrificed the family's entire fortune to educate them all. If this were the outcome, all her past efforts would be in vain. Persuaded by Oshin, Haruki swallowed his pride and begged Akemi to stay. This was precisely the words Akemi had been waiting to hear. Once they spoke openly, the family's main conflict was resolved, and this was exactly the outcome Oshin had hoped for. The family crisis had forged them back together. To help Haruki repay the bank interest, Kanako and Daiki both offered their property deeds. Oshin's two granddaughters suddenly matured, seeking jobs to contribute. Her grandson made a decision that filled Oshin with great joy. After graduating from university, he would start working in the family business. He vowed to fulfill his father's promise to his grandmother to restore the Kaga store's name. Akemi and her granddaughter, unusually, showed Oshin unprecedented care. When the store prospered, family members were preoccupied with personal gains and losses, indifferent to others' hardships. Yet when the family faced crisis, they suddenly cared for one another. Oshin came to feel that this crisis, painful as it was, had been worth it in the end. That same January, the Tamura family rented a suitable house. Haruki and Akemi hurriedly began moving. On the very eve of their departure, Kota made another unexpected visit. Oshin never imagined Kota's arrival would once again alter the fate of the Tamura family supermarket. Kota refused to see Oshin's life descend into hardship again, so during this period, he also helped Haruki find a buyer for store No. 17. Coincidentally, he knew someone at the largest supermarket chain. Through negotiations, the buyer agreed to take over store No. 17 and cover the bank loan. For the Tamura family, recovering half their investment meant the remaining 16 stores could be saved. The farewell dinner became a celebration. Haruki realized how valuable the friendships formed in poverty were. With Kota's help, store No. 7 was bought by the largest supermarket. By early March, all the paperwork was done. Haruki decided to focus on strengthening the remaining 16 stores. The Tamura family supermarket embarked once more on a new journey. Life is unpredictable. Fall down, get back up. Oshin's life story stands as the finest illustration of this truth. And so, Oshin's tale comes to a close.